Number 10, Exodus. If you took a medieval knight, dipped him in purple paint, and told him to act like a Magneto cover band, you'd get the headache known as Exodus. Born Bennett du Paris, this mutant was around since the Crusades, but I'm just gonna say he acts like he never left the 12th century. Apocalypse gave him near immortality and enough psychic power to move mountains, which he mostly uses to yell about mutant supremacy. He views Magneto as a literal god, often taking Magneto's ideas and cranking the phantasm up to a level that makes the actual master of magnetism look like a moderate. He spent the 90s as the muscle of the Acolytes, serving as the guy the X-Men had to punch when the writers were saving the real villains for a later issue. Which is a shame because I think this guy definitely had potential beyond that. The reason I find him exhausting is because he lacks the tragic backstory that makes other mutant villains interesting. Instead of having a soul, he just has a massive ego and a wardrobe full of unnecessary spikes. He speaks in a fake Shakespearean dialect that sounds like a theater student who had too much caffeine and not enough talent. On top of that, his power levels are all over the place. One day he's fighting the entire Avengers team by himself, the next day he's getting knocked out by a stiff breeze. He represents the era of comics where I guess bigger muscles and louder screaming were supposed to count as character development. While some newer stories try to make him a cool paladin, most readers remember him as the guy who made every crossover feel twice as long as it needed to be. Which is why I'm calling him the mutant equivalent of a pop-up ad that you cannot close. Number 9, Maximus the Mad. Imagine being the king of the Inhumans and having a brother who spends every waking second trying to steal your crown while complaining that he's the smart one. Maximus is the younger sibling of Black Bolt, and while his brother is a silent, regal powerhouse, Maximus is a loudmouth pest with mind control powers. He constantly claims his madness is just a level of genius that regular people cannot understand, which I definitely think is just a very convenient excuse for being a jerk. His entire personality is built on being jealous of his brother, leading him to plot endless coups that always fail in the exact same way. I personally find him frustrating because he is stuck in a narrative loop that has lasted for over 50 years. He pretends to be sane, betrays his family, takes over their city of Atlan for a few weeks, and then gets thrown back into his cell. It's like watching a rerun of a show that's not even that good for the first time. What makes it even crazier is that during the mid-2010s, Marvel tried to make him a top-tier threat on par with Thanos or Doctor Doom. They put him in every major book like Infinity and Uncanny Inhumans, but the extra exposure just made people realize how annoying he actually is. His dialogue often clutters the page with pseudo-intellectual rambling, while the actual heroes stand around waiting for him to shut the hell up. He lacks the physical presence to be scary and the emotional depth to be sympathetic, leaving him in a weird middle ground of just pure irritation. He's the guy at the party who thinks he's the most interesting person in the room, but really, he's just the loudest. You know what my hot take about him is? He's the type of villain whose most dangerous weapon is the fact that people do anything to stop him from talking. Number 8, Bastion. What do you get when you shove two giant mutant hunting robots through a magic portal and give the result of a goatee and a boring office job? Bastion is the fusion of Master Mold and Nimrod, two classic sentinels who merged into a human-looking hybrid with a very specific hatred for mutants. He led Operation Zero Tolerance, a storyline where he turned regular humans into sleeper agent cyborgs to hunt down the X-Men. Unlike the classic giant purple robots, Bastion looks like a middle manager who is about to deny your vacation request. Fans generally dislike him because he headlined a crossover event that many felt was the low point of the late 90s. But what irritates me the most is the fact that he is a dry, humorless bureaucrat whose primary power seems to be having as much plot armor as the writer needs. He could shrug off attacks from the most powerful mutants on the planet just by saying his system's adapted, which of course feels like a total cheat. His stories are often bleak and depressing, focusing on mutants being put into work camps and stripped of their dignity rather than fun superhero action. Because he sometimes looks like a normal guy in a suit, he lacks the visual excitement that usually comes with X-Men villains. There's also the issue of Sentinel fatigue, where readers get tired of seeing the same robots want to kill everyone plotline over and over again. Bastion is the most cynical and tedious version of that trope, representing a time when X-Men comics felt more like a chore than an adventure. I guess nothing says menacing supervillain like a guy who looks like he's about to explain your tax bracket. Number 7, Onslaught. If you ever wanted to see what happens when a comic book company decides to set its own universe on fire for a marketing gimmick, look at Onslaught. This giant red monster was born from the combined dark thoughts of Professor Xavier and Magneto, making him a psionic god with a bit too many spikes on his armor. He was the focus of a massive event in 1996 that supposedly killed off the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. But I think the real victim was the reader's patience. Fans hate Onslaught because his origin felt like a massive bait and switch after months of build-up. The writers teased a traitor within the X-Men for a long time, only to reveal it's just an evil version of the Professor, which honestly felt like a total cop-out. The character design is the peak of 90s excess, looking like a discarded toy from a series that went out of business. Beyond the bad look, Onslaught was the reason for Heroes Reborn, which, let's be real, is a disastrous reboot where Marvel characters were drawn with impossible proportions and terrible writing. Because he is tied to such a dark time in comic history, fans view him as a symbol of editorial choices gone wrong, and that's facts. He wasn't a character with a real motive, he was a walking plot device used to move characters from one book to another. He managed to make a fight against a literal god feel boring because there was genuinely no emotional weight to anything he did. As much as I hate him though, he's nothing compared to our next villain. Number 6, Strife. If you think Cable is already a confusing character, then this guy's basically him, but the writers decided to make him even more confusing by adding clones and time travel. Strife is a clone of Nathan Summers, who was praised by Apocalypse in a future where everyone wears knives for clothes, which I predict might actually be our new fashion trend soon. Because he does not have the techno-organic virus that his brother has, his psionic powers are fully functional, but he mostly uses them to complain about his childhood. He's the leader of the Mutant Liberation Front, but his actual goal is just to make his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, feel bad for abandoning him, which is just petty. Fans absolutely loathe him because he is a melodramatic brat in a suit of armor that looks like it belongs to a kitchen drawer. His helmet alone, I would say, is a crime against fashion, featuring enough sharp edges to make walking through a doorway a life-threatening risk. His dialogue is always full of over-the-top angst about his dark legacy, making him sound like a teenager who just discovered gothic poetry. What I think makes it a lot worse is that his backstory is a total nightmare to explain to anyone who hasn't spent 10 years reading X-Men wikis, because it's so confusing I can't even explain it. He's also responsible for the Legacy Virus, a plot point that killed off fan-favorite characters like Magik and Colossus and dragged the comics into a decade of misery. He represents the worst parts of the 90s. Confusing origins, impractical costumes, and endless shouting about things nobody cares about. He's basically a walking Swiss Army knife with the personality of a damp firework and even less utility. Number 5, Senator Kelly. Most villains in the Marvel Universe use lasers or magic, but I would say Senator Robert Kelly uses something much scarier. A pen and a voting record. He's the face of anti-mutant politics, constantly pushing for laws that treat mutants like dangerous weapons rather than people. He is the reason the Sentinels exist in the first place, and his fear-mongering led to the famous Days of Future Past timeline, where the world literally ends. Fans hate him with a passion that is usually reserved for real-life politicians who do not know when to stop talking. But the reason I'm personally so pissed at him is that he is too realistic. He's the kind of jerk you see on the news every night. You cannot just have Wolverine stab him because that would prove his point and make things worse for every mutant on Earth, which, in a way, is pretty much what we see in real life every day. This creates a sense of helplessness for the reader because the heroes cannot solve the problem with a big fight. I also think he's a huge hypocrite, often bugging the X-Men to save him when a real villain attacks and then going right back to his podium to call them monsters the next morning. While some versions of the character eventually learn their lesson, the classic Kelly is just a guy who uses hate to get more power. He's the character who ruins the fun of superheroes by bringing in the worst parts of reality. I hate to say this, but this guy might be the only man who can make a room full of people with superpowers feel like they're stuck in a detention hall. Number 4, Judas Traveller. During the 90s, Spider-Man went through a storyline called the Clone Saga that was so messy it almost killed the character's popularity, and Judas Traveller was the cherry on top of that disaster. He was introduced as an ancient godlike being who traveled with a bunch of weirdos to study the nature of evil. He spent his time putting Peter Parker through psychological torture, but the thing is, the writers had no idea who he actually was or what he was trying to do. He would show up and do things that looked like magic, only for the story to later claim it was all an illusion, which I genuinely think made every issue he appeared in feel like a waste of time. Fans hate him because he was a mystery box character where the box turned out to be empty. He felt like he belonged in a completely different comic book, like he wandered out of a Vertigo title and got lost in Queens. The eventual explanation for his powers was that he was just a mutant with a god complex, which I find so underwhelming that it made the previous 2 years of stories feel like even more pointlessness. He represents a time when Marvel editorial was just making things up as they went along, hoping the readers wouldn't notice. His dialogue was filled with pretentious philosophy that didn't actually mean anything, making him incredibly boring to read. He's basically the comic book version of a philosophy student who thinks he's deep because he wears a trench coat and talks in riddles. Number 3, Romulus. If you thought Wolverine's backstory was already complicated enough, Romulus arrives in 2007 to make it 100 times worse, which is enough to earn him the top 3 spot on this list. He was introduced as an ancient mutant who had been secretly controlling Logan's entire life for centuries, from his birth to the Weapon X program. He claimed that feral mutants like Sabretooth and Wolverine didn't evolve from humans, but from a separate line of wolf people called lupines. This idea was so terrible to many fans because it ignored decades of X-Men lore just to make one guy seem more important. If I'm being honest, it felt like a bad fan fiction that somehow made it into the actual comics. Romulus was designed to be better than Wolverine in every way. Stronger, older, and smarter, which I'm sure you agree just made it feel like a Mary Sue villain. His look was also pretty silly, featuring long white hair and gloves with claws on them because apparently he couldn't grow his own. By retconning him into every major event in Wolverine's history, the writers took away Logan's agency and made the Marvel Universe feel tiny. It turned a legendary hero into a puppet for a guy who looked like a rejected member of an 80s hair metal band. The lupine theory was so unpopular that Marvel eventually had to walk it back and admit it was mostly a lie just to fix the damage. He represents the kind of writing that thinks bigger is always better, even when it ruins the foundation of the character. He's proof that you can have all the power in the world and still look like a bargain bin Sabretooth. Number 2, Mephisto. Mephisto is Marvel's version of the devil, and while he has been a great villain for Doctor Strange, Spider-Man fans want him erased from existence. The source of this legendary hatred is a story called One More Day, where Peter Parker makes a deal with Mephisto to save his dying Aunt May. The price for this favor was Peter's marriage to Mary Jane, which Mephisto literally wiped out of the timeline. He's hated because he was used as a tool by Marvel's editors to reset Spider-Man's life because they thought a married hero was too old. It was a move that ignored years of character growth and made Peter look like a coward who would deal with a demon rather than accept the natural death of an elderly relative. Because of this, Mephisto is not just a villain in the story, he's a villain to the fans themselves. Every time he shows up now, it feels like a slap in the face to anyone who liked the Peter and MJ relationship. He represents the refusal of the company to let their characters evolve and grow up. Unlike other villains who try to take over the world, Mephisto's greatest crime was taking away a happy ending. He's the face of editorial interference, making him the most metatextually hated character in the entire Marvel library. In the end, I guess Hell's greatest devil is less scary than the people who thought that script was a good idea. Number 1, Ultimatum Magneto. The Ultimate Marvel Universe was supposed to be a fresh start for fans, but the version of Magneto found in the Ultimatum event turned it into a nightmare. After his daughter Wanda was killed, this Magneto decided to reverse the Earth's magnetic poles, causing a global flood that murdered millions of people in a single afternoon. This wasn't the complex, sympathetic revolutionary from the main comics. This was a genocidal lunatic who killed beloved heroes in the most gruesome ways possible. He famously snapped Professor Xavier's neck like it was a dry twig, a moment that I think feels like it was designed just to shock people rather than tell a good story. This character is top in this list because he single-handedly destroyed an entire line of comics that people had spent a decade enjoying. The Ultimatum event was filled with unnecessary gore and mean-spirited writing, and Magneto was at the center of all of it. He turned a universe that was once exciting and modern into a grim, edgy wasteland that made me think it was written by an angry teenager. There was no nuance to his actions, no political message, and absolutely no soul. He was just a monster used to clear the board of characters the writers didn't want to use anymore. The backlash was so strong that the Ultimate Universe never truly recovered its popularity. He's the ultimate example of how to ruin a legendary character by stripping away everything that makes them human. That, for me, is enough to make him the most hated villain in all of Marvel. Would you agree? Well, that's it for this one. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss a drop. Craving more stories from comics, movies, and beyond? Check out this video right here. Cheers, and see you in the next one.